The third line of defense is called the adaptive immune response, and it kicks in after the first and second lines of defense have already been either breached or they're already active. As we mentioned before, the adaptive immune response is mediated by the lymphocytes. So these are the B cells and T cells. Remember, lymphocytes are a type of leukocyte, and a leukocyte is just another word for a white blood cell. So the adaptive immune response has some bonuses over the primary and secondary responses. So first of all, the adaptive immune response has specificity, meaning that it is designed to attack specific pathogens. And it does that by identifying specific antigens, and antigens are little protein signals on the surface of cells of pathogens that can help to basically it's what the cells, the T cells and B cells recognize, and they know to attack things with a particular antigen on them. There's also self-regulation, meaning that these cells are designed to not attack your own antigens because all the cells in your body also have antigens on them. And those antigens help to give your cells it's kind of like a tag. It's almost like a name tag saying that they belong to you and that they are supposed to be there. So the goal is to attack the stuff with the antigens that aren't supposed to be there, but not attack the cells with the antigens that are supposed to be there. The other benefit of the adaptive immune response is that there is memory that builds up. What this means is that when you're exposed to a pathogen, the first time you're exposed to it, you are likely to have symptoms, and as your body kind of fights off that pathogen. But after the cells are made to specifically recognize that pathogen, some of those cells turn into memory cells. And then the second time you encounter that same pathogen, the memory cells are able to respond more quickly than the primary adaptive response. And in doing so, your body typically fights off the pathogen before you ever develop symptoms. So, you may have heard that you never catch the same cold twice. That's because once you've been infected with a cold, your body develops memory against that particular cold virus. Now, if you catch another cold, it's because the virus has mutated in some way and the memory cells can no longer recognize it, and then it can make you sick again. We'll talk a little bit more about how modern medicine kind of takes advantage of this memory of the adaptive immune responses, and it does that through the formation of vaccines. So first of all, we'll talk about the T lymphocytes, and then in the next video we'll talk about the B lymphocytes. So the T lymphocytes are the leukocytes, or the white blood cells. They develop in the red bone marrow, but they mature in the thymus, and that's partially how they got their name, T lymphocyte, because they mature in the thymus. Now, the first thing is that they have to be able to recognize self-antigens and not attack them before they mature. So basically, they go through a selection process where if they aren't able to differentiate the good antigens that are supposed to be on your cells versus the bad antigens that are on the pathogens, then they don't make it to maturity. Now, once they are mature, they have to be activated by something called an antigen presenting cell. And these APCs are where the phagocytes come into play, because the phagocytes, like the macrophages and dendritic cells, are also able to serve as these antigen presenting cells. So let's take a look. So these antigen presenting cells, as we mentioned, the macrophages, dendritic cells, and B cells, they can engulf a pathogen. So you can see here in our little cartoon that we have a dendritic cell, and it's engulfing the little green pathogen here. After the phagocyte eats or engulfs that bacterium, it breaks down that bacteria and it takes part of the bacteria's antigen and actually sticks it on its own cell surface. And when it sticks it on the cell surface, it sticks it there was something called an MHC molecule. And this MHC molecule it's kind of the combination of the MHC molecule and the digested antigen of the bacterium that is able to activate the T cells. So the T cells recognize the MHC plus the pathogenic antigen, and once it does that, that T cell becomes activated. And once it becomes activated, it starts to be cloned rapidly, meaning that it makes really rapid copies of itself, so that there are a lot of T cells that are now able to recognize that pathogenic antigen. Because every individual cell doesn't have to be activated by a APC, an antigen presenting cell. Once this cell is activated, all of its clones are also activated and able to respond to that same antigen. Now with T lymphocytes, these clones can turn into a variety of different cells. So some of them are helper T cells, and these helper T cells secrete chemicals to help to activate macrophages, T cells, and B cells. So the helper T cells are really, they're kind of a link between the B cells, the T cells, and also the second line of defense in order to kind of activate them all and have them all work together. There's also cytotoxic T cells, which are called killer T cells, and these work very similar to the natural killer cells in that they secrete perforins and granzymes. And just like the natural killer cells, the perforins poke holes in the cell membranes of a cell that's been infected by a virus or a bacterium. And then the granzymes are the enzymes that are able to enter the infected cell through the perforins. And then the granzymes basically break down the cell from the inside out, and that neutralizes the pathogen and keeps it from spreading and infecting other cells. And then the third type of effector T lymphocyte is called a regulatory T cell, or it's also called a suppressor T cell. And this helps to suppress the immune response when it's no longer needed, because this is a very, very powerful response. And if there isn't some sort of, kind of negative control to dial it back, then these T cells could maybe go a little crazy and start attacking cells that shouldn't be attacked. As we mentioned, memory also occurs. So after the primary infection, so the first time the T lymphocytes mount a defense against a specific pathogen, some memory cells are formed. And these memory cells stick around in your body fluids and your lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes, and they're kind of just patrolling. And then if you're ever exposed to that exact same pathogen again, the memory cells don't have to go through that reactivation process, which involves the antigen presenting cells. Instead, they can already recognize that pathogen, and they can start cloning and fighting off the pathogen much quicker. And by doing that more quickly, you typically don't notice symptoms the second time you're exposed to that same pathogen. And in many cases, this provides lifelong immunity against that specific pathogen.